Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may happen to be. Welcome to an XX podcast. Super excited today to state that we have obviously David Chaum, who is the godfather of crypto, pioneer in cryptography and privacy preserving technology, as well as Andrew Bustamante, former CIA covert operative, U.S. combat veteran, dealing very much so in encrypted communications. Want to open up the floor and allow for David, first and foremost, can you give a little bit of an intro and a background into yourself for the audience that we have here today?
Sure, King. Is that back in the very late 70s, early 80s, I realized how important privacy was for society going forward and the information age that I saw unfolding even in those early days. And the National Security Agency announced that work on cryptography would be born classified like nuclear secrets. So there would be no public research in cryptography, which is really the only way to build like walls in cyberspace related to privacy and secrecy of information. And so I realized it was a big problem. And so I risked spending the rest of my life in jail by organizing the first conference after that in a public conference on cryptography, and created the International Association for Cryptologic Research, and sponsored, we have three major conferences every year, and then a bunch of other stuff, and it published a journal and so on. So that's, so my interest in all this goes way back. And around the same time, I proposed eCash and mixing, and those technologies and ideas are still fundamental to digital privacy. And later, I did the DigiCash company, and DigiCash was issued by Deutsche Bank and a bunch of banks around the world. And we also had our own digital currency, Cyberbucks. So that was in the mid 90s, way before, Bitcoin or anything. And then more recently, I've led the charge on putting together the XX network, and now it's run by a separate foundation. But I guess I still get credit for having been the founder of that. And I'm doing some work on voting technology and a new kind of eCash that I think we'll talk about, and privacy in telecommunications and in a lot of other contexts. So that's what I've been up to in a nutshell, I think.
Thank you so much, David. Really appreciate the intro. Andrew, if you could potentially, just give us a little bit of an overview on yourself, a background, and then we'll definitely get kicked off with some of these poignant questions. Thank you so much, by the way, today for joining in, both to David and Andrew. I know how busy both of you gentlemen are.
No, it's absolutely my pleasure to be here, just like David. So my name is Andrew Bustamante, former covert CIA intelligence officer. I have some experience, of course, in working with encryption, just like David was saying, encrypted communications for the military as well as with CIA. But I also have a lot of experience combating the negative side of cryptocurrency, right? Because cryptocurrency through the late 90s, early 2000s was kind of the primary funding option for bad guys around the world. So there were a lot of terrorist attacks. There's still a lot of human trafficking. There's a lot of bad side that we don't like to talk about when it comes to encryption, encrypted communications, privacy, and of course, cryptocurrency. So I kind of have a different point of view on some things. I still believe in my heart of hearts, as my optimistic, idealistic American self, that we are going to find a way to embrace a future of digital currency. But we're still very much in the evolutionary process, right? And I feel like there's a great conversation to be had there. Not a conversation I want to miss out on either, which is why it was so easy for me to say yes to making time to come here. So thanks very much for having me.
Thanks for coming on, Andrew. Thank you so much, Andrew. Darren, I'll turn it over to you. I know that you've got kind of the beginning of the questions to kick this off, and yeah.
So how much does the government truly know about individual citizens' actions in the United States? Just based on your experience, is privacy an illusion at this point, or like how do we protect our individual privacy in the age of blockchain and crypto assets?
Yeah, it's a great question, Darren. So I'll throw out there first that the government really doesn't care about most people. And that's exactly the opposite of what all presidential candidates want you to believe. But the truth is that of the 300 million Americans that are out there, at least in the United States, the government really doesn't care about you. They care about the amalgam of groups. So they care about Democrats and Republicans. They care about conservative Idaho populations, and they care about the 17th district in Virginia, right? So they care about amalgams, but they don't care about individuals. And the same thing really applies to your privacy, because your privacy doesn't offer the federal government any kind of advantage. To know whether or not you're cheating on your taxes or cheating on your wife, or whether you got a fake military discount when you bought that grill from Home Depot, they really don't care. Those types of infractions don't offer a substantive benefit to the federal government. It would cost more to send an FBI, to commit an FBI resource to investigate your fraudulent activity at Home Depot. It would cost more to the federal government than what they would ever be able to recoup back. And it's really hard to imagine, but the federal government really does have to work like a corporate entity. So they have to constantly be asking themselves, is it worth the resources to enforce the law? And if it's not worth the resources, they don't enforce the law. And as sad as it is, this is a big part of why you see so many school shootings. It's not worth the resources, right? That's how the federal government sees it. That's why they keep pushing it down to a state level issue, and the states keep pushing it down to a police district level, because nobody has a solution to fix this problem without spending an exorbitant amount of money and pissing off a lot of Americans in the process. So because of that, they kind of keep pushing the responsibility to somebody else. And you got to think like the federal government. They've got to try to use a limited budget, a tax dollar budget, and they have to choose how they prioritize that budget. So, I mean, the good news to that is that your privacy is not really of interest to the federal government. The bad side of that is that your privacy is very interesting. Your private information is extremely interesting to corporate America. They want to turn you as an individual into an amalgam of a target, right? So they care about your age, your spending habits, how much time you're online, what you watch on YouTube. They care about who your friends are in your network and how much money your friends make, because they can create an avatar out of you, and they can use that avatar to customize and target their product sets and their product lines. So your privacy is not interesting to the federal government. It is very interesting to corporate America. And the real reason that privacy is kind of an illusion these days, especially in the digital era, is because we oftentimes volunteer our private data in order to gain more convenience in a digital age. We connect our phones to our credit cards. We say yes to sharing our contacts between different applications, and the list goes on and on. We are essentially outsourcing our privacy to whatever digital platform we're engaging. And that's the way I see it. David, I would totally welcome your points of view too.
Well, thanks, Andrew. I mean, a lot of what you say, it does ring true in the narrow senses that you mentioned, these examples, and I think one could discuss, the broader questions, but I think we are witnessing just in the last months a dramatic sea change in this whole domain, because artificial intelligence is now threatening to be able to basically spy on our inner thoughts, to take it to a whole different level. And the kind of, like, if you want to say, governments are only interested in groups and privacy of groups and so on. I mean, just if we'll just, accept that assertion, I mean, you could sort of wonder, well, what kind of groups would they be interested in? And maybe those would be groups of people who might want to, riot in the streets and if government crossed some particular line or whatever. I mean, it's hard to figure that out just from looking at you know, where you know what kind of discounts they get when they buy their next barbecue. But you know, AI changes everything, and you know the sort of cost effectiveness and argument, it's actually flipped around because AI, well, at least it has been asserted by my uh, dear friend Eric Schmidt in his book on AI that it would, you know, with co-author with Henry Kissinger and so on, that it would be something that would only be available to very large actors. And you know, I mean, if you look at the amount of computing power that's involved and if access data, I mean, people with a lot of, you know, in the next generation of NVIDIA chips holds a lot of promise for what's going to be possible. And you know, it's not everybody that has access to any of that stuff. It's only a few major actors. So when you have a kind of centralization of ability to really use AI effectively, and on the one hand, and you have the, you know, diminishing cost of individual surveillance on the other. So the whole, you know, equation, the whole argument space is turned inside out really by this new entrant, this centralized powerful AI. We don't even know how powerful it is. I mean, this goes to the whole question of what we know about how effective intelligence and, you know, all that is, and what we should know, and so on. I know those are very interesting questions, but you know, it relates to quantum, you know, cryptography and all these things because we don't know the extent to which government is actually active in these things, and maybe for good reasons, but nevertheless, we don't know, and so it's potentially, you know, a much bigger issue than we can prove, and just I don't want to grandstand here. Just the last point is, and then that itself has dramatic implications. In other words, if AI and all this surveillance stuff and spy stuff is really powerful, and the public's getting a sense of that, then it has what, you know, we've called in the privacy space forever, we called it the chilling effect. You know, it scares the whatever out of people, and they, you know, tend to march in line and not step out, and that has very big you know, impact on society. So it's and it's not really a stable impact either. It's a so I just wanted to you know, try to point out that it's you know, it's not like the old days of Mission Impossible, or you know, when the Privacy Protection Study Commission wrote this, you know, 700-page book about privacy in the U.S. or any of that stuff. It's a whole different world now.
So is privacy, can it even succeed in this digital age? I mean, if it's cost effective, or it matters if, you know, how many people are actually getting away with something, right? The government doesn't want to spend the resources for it, but if people are actually getting away from something, that seems like that's where they would spend the resources. I mean, David's committed his life to kind of creating privacy preserving technologies. I know that there's a lot of different solutions out there, and there's always some type of way to kind of circumvent things. But what if there actually is a technology now that is truly private? Would the government have a reaction towards it?
Yeah, you know, I think if I'm understanding, David, if I'm understanding your point, we're getting into an era where privacy is just going to be flat out difficult, like difficult to preserve, difficult to protect, difficult to safeguard. So it really becomes all about.
Yeah, let me jump in and sort of flip that around because, you know, apply a little jujitsu here.
Yeah.
Aikido. That you know, but that really means that privacy is far more important now than it ever was. In fact, it's the whole game. In other words, if you want to have democracy, which is apparently why we're all here and what we're all, fighting for, as they used to say when I was growing up, right? If we're not about democracy, then I don't know, then I might as well just leave the call, because that's the basis for the whole thing. And I think what you see is everyone in the world seems to be at some level wanting democracy if it can really work. And there's a lot of weaknesses that are exposed in democracy, and people have questions about it. But that's once democracy is lost and someone takes over control of the planet, that's a very different world, and then we don't have to debate privacy or any of this other stuff. So if you want to preserve democracy, and it has been declining, it's not in the most robust state, then in the face of all this AI and surveillance capability, which we know is still there even after Snowden, the only countermeasure, so to speak, is privacy. And then you can say, well, but there can't be any privacy because all this surveillance and stuff is so perfect. But that's not true. People meet in cafes or in living rooms or wherever, and have confidential discussions all the time. And they may leave their mobile phone in the refrigerator in the hotel room, like Edward Snowden did, but or not. But basically, we still have many of the traditional means for people to have a protected sphere of their own thoughts and to discuss among their friends and relatives and so on, their closest associates, to develop their and share their political ideas. That still exists. And that's the basis for the formation of democratic participation and the identity and self that's needed for that. So it's not gone. We have to be a little bit more careful, because spies are sneaky.
The spies are sneaky, yeah, but human
beings, really
beings.
sneaky. I'm sorry, I was a mean thing to say. I don't mean that sneaky. I mean, it's surprising how serious they can be, and if you're not in the business, you might not expect a lot of the things that they actually can easily do. So you have to have some awareness of this if you want to protect your privacy. You can't be too naive. So
David, there's a couple points there.
Privacy is the whole game. Let me just close on by saying that, to me, privacy is the whole game, because absent a certain modicum of privacy, there is no democracy, and then there's no reason to have this podcast.
Andrew, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so David, I appreciate your point of view, right? And you're taking a very idealistic point of view, and I think we can all relate to a very idealistic point of view. But you're even saying yourself, right? Democracy is on the decline. And the world knows that democracy is really just a giant experiment. Democracy has only worked for a few hundred years, whereas authoritarianism has worked for thousands of years.
Andrew, that's bullshit. No,
give me the oldest, longest running democracy you know of, David.
2,500 years ago. Look at my website. You'll see.
2,500 years, David. China has been around for 5,000 years and as an authoritarian country.
Yeah, but there were democracies.
India has been a caste system for 7,000 years.
There were democracies in city-states in India.
And democracies have fallen. Democracies have fallen time and time again because of human ideology. Because human beings start to believe that representatives can protect.
Then I'm not here.
All right,
we believe in democracy, or in the age of AI and super powerful states that agglomerate the wealth of hundreds of millions of people.
We can, yeah. So
there's no
Darren
sense
and
in
Solomon,
us
we
little
can
people
go
having a
anywhere you want to
conversation.
go. We can go anywhere you want to go,
Yeah,
David.
well,
All I'm saying is, if even having a conversation about something alternative to democracy is enough to make you run away, that's part of the challenge that we're facing right now. Is people don't want to have hard conversations. They want to draw hard lines in the sand and run away
I'm
if
just
it's
saying
not
that's
fitting
the
within their
basis.
ideology.
That's the whole basis for the conversation. Either you believe in democracy or you don't. Now, it is true that we are in a, democracy after the Second World War, as you well know, went from a very few nation states to basically 70% in a couple of decades, and then it's tapered off, largely, in my view, due to the perfection of intelligence techniques like disinformation and manipulation of public opinion, and the ways, because we have a lot of democratic forms around the world, but they're not true democracies because they are manipulated by these various means that were in part developed, during the Second World War by intelligence efforts. So but that is not a, that's a small change. There's been there was a huge growth, and now there's a decline. It's not gone back to anywhere near below where it was after the Second World War. And my point is not.
That's a decline in less than 70 years, man. Think about that. That means we peaked and declined in 70 years. That's a sneeze.
Intelligence.
So my question is more geared towards, is it even possible? Not so much like the ideology behind it, but like, is it possible with all the state-of-the-art technology that's out there, like the XX network, where everything is quantum secure, mixed? Like, is it possible for that technology to even exist with the government the way it is? We know that they can get around Signal and Telegram and all these different privacy preserving technologies. Yet, if it did show up, what would their reaction even be? How could they even deal with that?
So I think this is, you've got a great question there, Darren. So here's the thing that's important for everyone to understand. In a democracy, it's the responsibility of the state to keep each individual safe, right? Would we all agree to that?
The first priority is to keep it a democracy.
I agree.
Correct. I agree with you, David.
Okay,
keep the democracy safe. That's the first priority.
So because of that, safe, not to keep individuals safe. Yes.
To keep the democracy safe, right?
Right. That's the
right.
First
so in order to keep the democracy safe,
number one.
Correct. I completely agree. So that means any potential threat to the democracy has to be a threat that they can combat. So here's the truth of it from my point of view. An individual's privacy is really irrelevant to the federal government until that individual starts to pose a national security threat that could infringe upon the democracy itself.
You're wrong.
So because
question, though,
that's dead wrong.
So David,
Andrew,
just look at domestic terrorism.
Dude,
you make these statements like when you don't know. Like you're coming from a limited point of view and an idealistic stance, and you're shooting down any argument to the alternative.
So we're doing a good job here.
I can give you examples.
What you're saying.
I can give you examples. I can give you examples of where individual privacy has been overruled in the best interest of the state, right? Domestic terrorism is one of those examples. The leak that just happened this week about with DoD files, right? These are all examples of where when you become a threat to national security, there is no expense the government will not pay. There is no resource they will not tap into to preserve security of the state. So when iPhone promises privacy and when Apple says that your data cannot be shared and there's no backdoor into an iPhone, as soon as a terrorist network uses iPhones to connect to each other, guess what? That terrorist network gets disbanded because FBI can reach in and collect all of that data. So the idea that any kind of quantum computer or any kind of AI is going to protect our privacy in the future is only true to the extent that you do not become a threat to the nation. Once you become a threat to the nation, all the companies that created that quantum computer, all the tools that created that AI are going to be leveraged by the federal government to reverse engineer and find who that threat is and take apart that threat.
I think maybe David a minute if you wanted to respond to that, but I want to kind of pivot a little bit and maybe everybody take a deep breath real quick. I know that there's varying viewpoints here, which I think is great. But I wanted to ask a little bit about Crypto AG. And I know, Andrew, maybe you know a little bit about Crypto AG. To give everybody that's listening a background, and that was quite the exciting first 25 minutes here. During World War II, Crypto AG earned a contract to build code-making machines for U.S. troops. Flush with cash, it became a dominant maker of encryption devices for decades, navigating waves of tech from mechanical gears to electronic circuits, finally silicone chips and software. This Swiss firm, which is Crypto AG, made millions of dollars selling equipment to more than 120 countries well into the 21st century. Clients including Iran, Latin America, nuclear rivals India and Pakistan, and even the Vatican. But what none of the customers knew of Crypto AG was that Crypto AG was actually secretly owned by the CIA in a highly classified partnership with West German intelligence. And the spy agency, the CIA, rigged the company's devices so they could easily break the codes that countries were using from that firm to send encrypted messages. So question from this is, do these types of events or companies still exist today that are actually kind of CIA ran initiatives? And then on top of that question, do you, both of you, David and Andrew, do you think that those types of things or those types of companies exist in crypto as well, cryptocurrency? Are there projects that may be out there right now that are used for any number of means, whether it be data collection or, you take a number with that? So would love to hear your guys' thoughts.
Well, I am a little bit unhappy not having had a chance to really respond to what Andrew was saying, and I don't mean to criticize the through line of your argument, Andrew. What I would like to do is call attention to a different perspective, which is that absent the ability for people to have protected spheres of communication and develop themselves as individuals and their political thoughts, there's no real justification for a democratic state to protect the state itself if it's not protecting the democracy. So when I talked about protecting the democracy, you changed that into protecting the state. And I think one should be a little bit careful there. It's the democracy itself, and that requires individual participation and a protected sphere. And so, I mean, people in government, they all say they're working to protect the Constitution, but very often that they translate that to is, oh, we're working to protect the government and the state, and that's different, and it's a debate I don't want to get into, but I can tell you a lot about Crypto AG if you like. Crypto AG, I knew them, I visited them, I broke their codes back in the 90s, and I did that I was working for a multinational corporation to see what kind of crypto they could buy, and we went over there and I broke it. And it's also true there's another company in Switzerland that actually a few years later, it was revealed had the same fate. That was called Greatog AG, and I also visited them, and I also broke their stuff. And it was a lot easier to break stuff like that. But
you mentioned this before, David, in our last
But
and
not only that, and I just want to mention it because I can't help. It's just so ironic to me that I broke this stuff, and not only that, Crypto AG bought technology that my company developed and made it into their own products. So I just find this quite amazing, and I can also tell you that people in Switzerland are really pissed off about this. They really don't like this because it impacted their brand very negatively. But what I can also tell you is it isn't unique to Switzerland. I also broke the equipment of a company called Dato Tech, for example, which is in Texas. And that stuff was really easy to break. And when the U.S. government gives aid to all these countries around the world, military aid, part of the condition is that those countries buy military equipment from us, from our American companies. So there were all these countries that were given money by the U.S. government. They went and spent this money on Datotech equipment, and this stuff is so breakable, it's ridiculous. So I just want to say, I mean, maybe I could get myself in trouble for saying it was. Maybe I'm sure they've improved it, but I showed them how to break that stuff as well. These are just isolated examples. If you read some of the Snowden stuff, you'll just see the incredible measures to which governments go to spy on everybody, intercepting routers, at the FedEx, transshipment points and changing the chips in them or whatever. I mean, they do stuff this is what I was referring to earlier, stuff you wouldn't imagine. When you hear about it, it's like, well, okay, they paid $10 million to the RSA company to use, an elliptic curve for some random number generator so that all these other systems could be broken. I mean, they just do stuff you wouldn't expect, but they will in effect stop at nothing. And it's quite amazing what all they've been able to intercept, by asking people to give them information, threatening them, getting compatriots or intercept, all this various stuff. The full range of tradecraft, right, has been applied to spy on Americans, and from what I understand, it's continuing.
So the crypto AG example is an excellent, it's an excellent example of a strategy that's used in gaining informational superiority, right? If you can make yourself a commercial product or appear like a commercial product that everybody wants, then before you know it, everybody's buying your commercial product because they think it's the most secure product, when in fact, you're the one that controls the back door. And that's the benefit, the superpower of the United States is that we are an incredibly innovative country and everybody wants what we have. The top countries around the world send their highest performing engineering students to the United States. They send their most aspiring legal students to the United States. They want American weapons. They want American technology. They want American financial systems. So all of that speaks to the utility in continuing a model like with crypto AG. When you can create American superiority, American dominance, American primacy through a national security lens by controlling the IP of a certain technology, when everybody else starts to use that technology, you're the only one that has like the keys to the kingdom for everybody's tools. And that is an extremely common strategy when it comes to building individual networks or building cybersecurity networks or building financial networks. So do I think that it still exists? Absolutely, it still exists. You don't break something that works. Crypto AG was just one example of an outstanding global reaching priority and operation that then only became known in the late 2020 or 2019 or whatever. To David's point, David's actually talking about how he went in and cracked the codes. Well, that's great. We want people like David to come in and crack the codes so we can make them better so that only we know how to crack everybody else's codes, right? Yeah. That's exactly the strategy, and that's why it works, because there will always be experts who want to come in and apply their expertise, not realizing that their expertise is being used to advance national security priorities for the United States.
I don't want to argue with you. Andrew, I was fooled by your wild hairdo. I thought of you as like a, somehow countercultural, young guy who's got this free spirit and trying to do the right thing.
That's your mistake, David.
Yeah, my mistake. That was, you used that to, infiltrate organizations or something.
Welcome to Tradecraft, David.
But you're speaking a very hardcore line, and it's a, I have good friends who, have the same kinds of attitudes. It's just that, I can tell you an interesting factoid, which is that crypto AG, is the Greytog one, which I broke. I said it's pretty easy to break. The way I broke it was with a cryptanalytic technique, which only entered the public literature several years later. And allegedly, this was also known to IBM, was disclosed to IBM by NSA to get IBM to shut up about DES and to let it become a standard. And so Don Coppersmith was apparently told about differential cryptanalysis. He admitted that, I think. And so, and I've heard this from other people in the, in the business, in the field. And so I think what this betrays is that they knew full well that this stuff was breakable. And they need me to go in there and tell them how to break it. They knew it. This stuff is, it's like a Trojan horse. I mean, it's a proven intelligence technique, right? That's time honored, but it's, this is it's a horrible. It was to me, one thing about the Greytug coder that I broke was that it was used for Swift. So that meant that all this in those days, all the security of Swift was based on these little blue boxes. It's called Swift coder. And I mean, so that meant that NSA saw every single transfer between every bank in the world. And if they wanted to go in and mess with the numbers, they could. Now, that's an awful lot of power.
Somebody is going to hold that power. That's the thing. You've got to accept that in the world, somebody is going to hold that power. Right now, you've got the Chinese who are trying to create an alternative to Swift. David,
Andrew,
the Chinese are trying to create an alternative to Swift. So if the United States doesn't control the data, then the Chinese will control the data. If the Chinese and the Americans don't control the data, then the Israelis will control the data. It's all about understanding that human beings, the first law of economics is supply and demand. There are limited resources, so people will
really
always
interesting factoid, Andrew. I hear you. There are a lot of people who I've seen argue, the fundamental inevitability of geopolitics and the simplicity of it and the brutality of it and so on. That's all nice. But one of the things I did in the 80s, and I got this, you look at my website, best paper in the last 30 years in theoretical computer science award for it was about multi-party computation. And we introduced this notion of unconditional multi-party computation. And what that shows is that information isn't as simple as you might think, and that geopolitics is not inevitable. So a multi-party computation allows a set of participants, say 7 different people, to do a mutually agreed computation. In other words, run a piece of software that they all agree on, where none of them can tamper with the output or see any of the secrets that everyone put in as input. And that statement is true even if the 3 or 4 of those people have quantum computers, and someone can tap all the lines. If this is unconditionally true, it's information theoretically true. So it's a very fundamental result. But what it tells you is that information security has a kind of fungibility that is unanticipated in ordinary human experience. It can provide a structure for a world where people are all doing cooperative things without any central entity knowing what's going on.
It can. I agree. It can.
Let me ask the question to both of you guys.
David, prior to that, there was no mechanism like that. And what we proved is that you can do it in general for any algorithm in polynomial time. So it's a very fundamental result. So I just want to say, AI also changes this whole geopolitics thing. Because apparently for $600, I read some newspaper article, you could build your own AI thing, and I mean, it's going to be abused potentially by all kinds of crazy actors, and the balance is really So I just urge everyone just to think back. Like when I was in college, there was this popular slogan. It would say, "What are we fighting for?"
Yeah.
Right? This was during the Vietnam War. What the whole point of all this is for human, dignity and freedom and expression and participation in society. All these good things. That's the basis of democracy. Let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. Let's not get all worked up about evil people and so on. Let's keep our eye on the prize, which is to let's create a world where people can thrive. Let's focus on that.
Pretty decent question for both of you, based on a little bit of what Andrew touched on and a little bit of what David touched on as well. Andrew, you briefly mentioned BRICS and kind of that separation. Especially, I think this has been stemming way before the sanctions with all the SWIFT aspects. I mean, the BRICS nations have been coming together, try to separate themselves from the dollar for quite some time. And I kind of have a lead into this. I mean, if you dig back into what Russia was doing, I think it was their second regulated platform in the nation, which was called Atomize. And it was like this really kind of short press release. But you look into Atomize and its tokenization of, precious metals across the board. And you look into who Atomize is. They're a subsidiary of a company called Nornickel, which has like a Russian oligarch pretty much running the company. The world's largest palladium producer. There's been a clear separation. So during your Lex Friedman podcast, you mentioned that the security cabinet for each president is essentially filled with, for lack of a better sense of phrasing it, cronies. There's a lot of nepotism that goes on. So the question that I have is, from your stance, and I guess from David's stance as well, do you think the United States is as far behind as we're led to believe as citizens with distributed ledger technology, the central bank digital currency aspects? Because it's certainly where the BRICS nations are going. And then how do those nations interoperate once everything does kind of come to fruition?
Yeah, I wouldn't say that the United States is behind. If anything, I would say that we've probably got quite a bit more in the engineering space than we let on. It's just a matter of funding, right? So the United States doesn't turn our power to really generate things quickly comes with the enormous volume of economics that we can put into it. We can put huge amounts of dollars into advancing technology very quickly because we can just advance the research. What happens with countries like China and Brazil, India, and South Africa, our BRICS nations, is that they're not working as a cohesive unit. They're working as separate countries that have a trade agreement between them.
Recently, I've seen that shift as well, though. I mean, even as far as, what was it, a couple of weeks ago, China brokered a peace deal between Saudi Arabia and Iran
exactly. And just today, the Brazilian president is out there advocating Russia's position in Ukraine and how the United States is being a warmonger. So you can see the BRICS nations kind of supporting each other on other foundations besides just trade agreements. But to your point, Solomon, I think the United States has much more that we are able to bring to the fight than we let the public know. Because if you let the public know what you possess, you essentially let your opponents know what you possess. That's why we have levels of classification. That's why we have classified agreements and NDAs with leading universities, right? MIT, Georgia Tech, like the list goes on. All of our Ivy League universities, they all have private classified agreements with engineering schools so that we can pull the top talent, but also so that we have a way of developing cutting edge technology that's not available for economic or industrial espionage.
Would love for David. Oh, no, go ahead. I know this is like the Wild West of an interview, by the way, guys. And both you, Andrew and David, you guys are doing absolutely fantastic. David, I would love for maybe if you could maybe answer to Andrew's points, or, give your view of how these networks and ecosystems can operate.
Okay. I want to say this simply. Geopolitics, in my opinion, is so over. Okay? Yes.
We're not seeing the same world, David. We're not living in the same world, my friend.
Let's let David.
Give me a break. All right? Let me speak without interruption. Thank you. So why do I say geopolitics is over? Because it is, I mean, I want to just as a side note say it's easy to spin up all kinds of stories and tie out to all kinds of media coverage, and you could debate it, and there's there's boatloads of geopolitical banter, and it's all very engaging and interesting, and you can relate to it as an individual, but it is a distraction because geopolitics is over. And the reason is because the real problems that the world has, which are real problems, are fundamentally not addressable by geopolitics. What are those fundamental problems? Well, where I live last summer, it was too hot for me to live here. Let me put it to you that way. This planet is getting wrecked. That's not something that you can solve by geopolitics. You cannot, with geopolitics, really solve this whole AI thing and use it to give humans the potential and allow civilization to thrive. You can barely use it. You can barely push back against its use to for evil. You have there are some really big problems in the world economy. You cannot, there's a lot of technologies which need to be centralized. And by, carving everything up and going back to some kind of Cold War, we're just really retarding progress in a bunch of things which would benefit humanity dramatically. So, and why do I say geopolitics is so over? Fundamentally, really, because I believe and I hope that the public is not that easily fooled any longer. It's like, internet and these kind of, like great shows like yours and the training camp that Andrew has and so on. They've exposed people to so much, really valuable information and allow you to like find your way around and amplify and learn things and so forth, to the extent that I think that what we're seeing is that people seem to be complacent, seem to be business as usual and so on, just like, in Eastern Europe before the wall fell. But back in the back of their mind, they're thinking, why do all those guys in the West, why are they driving around in those, in those Mercedes and those Porsches when we have these stupid Troubies here that, are polluting and two-cycle, vehicles. I mean, we can't buy food. All we can buy is like bread. There's subterranean or I don't know call it. There's I think that the public is a lot smarter than you would guess if you were watching a lot of very popular TV shows. So that's really why geopolitics is so over, because it is fundamentally incapable of providing a society that can really take advantage of these technologies and use them effectively and thrive. And it's not wasting all its resources on all this combat and spying and preemptive stuff, and and it's not living with these chilling effects and all this other crap. It's so that's people realize that in their heart of hearts, to quote Andrew, deep down they feel that, they know that. There's a lot of people that realize that. And so I think that we are, maybe I'm too optimistic, but I think we are moving quietly towards a really fundamentally better world where geopolitics has no place.
So that brings up a good point. Is trust is being eroded. You can see it just like in the headlines and everything, right? Did Andrew leave? Trust is being eroded. It's like whatever's happening right now. People are looking at like power structures right now, and they have doubts towards the power structures. A good example of people doubting the power structure is if you just look at like Epstein, everyone's joking that he suddenly killed himself, and like everyone just accepts it as a hit, and everybody's fine with that, laughing about that. It's like trust has completely been eroded from the top down, and at the same time, our money's being eroded. Inflation has hit record highs. Our debt to GDP are at all-time high, and these circumstances throughout history have always surrounded something that was transformational that was about to happen, a new world order, so to speak, a new structure to power. So my question is towards Andrew. Are there people in the CIA and intelligence agencies that think about these things from like an economic standpoint, like people outside of Powell and Yellen that just, kind of comfort the markets? Are there people that, there's think tanks like what I'm just talking about? Does that happen?
Yeah, essentially the way that we do it, Darren, is you don't trust that kind of calculation or assessment to a staffer. You don't keep that in-house. You go to a think tank and you work with think tanks, multiple think tanks, to get their assessments. So it's no secret that some of the closest partners with CIA and NSA are commercial entities, right? Booz Allen Hamilton, Deloitte, CACI, the list goes on, and they'll get multiple assessments every year from these individuals because they employ, effective economists, senior economists, and researchers, and they can come up with a sort of estimate about what is reasonable to expect in the next 12 to 24 months regarding macroeconomics and things of that sort. So it's better to outsource it to a specialty group or lean into any one of the relationships that we have with leading institutions, right? Colleges, universities, et cetera, because that's where the information comes from. And we trust American institutions because they're some of the leading institutions in the world. So it's very easy to kind of sign a 5-year agreement with Deloitte and make sure that inside the terms of that 5-year agreement, Deloitte does not create any kind of assessment for, a company that's associated with some other country that's hostile to the United States. But yeah, that we would never trust that kind of assessment to an internal resource, because internal career bureaucrats are exactly that. They're career bureaucrats. They're not career specialists.
So we rely heavily on the private sector. So if we enter a world like of digital currencies, of like this new technology, it's safe to assume that the U.S. is going to continue what they've always done and rely on the private sector to kind of navigate the situation, right? Some of the things that we were talking about prior to recording is Andy was talking about the efficiencies, some of the things that the government's looking at with crypto. It's not all bad, right? It's there's a lot of benefits that can help, just with cross-border payments or privacy. There's this technology is unleashing something that can kind of help the world, and that goes back to what I was saying earlier about this surrounds something big, right? Like a new world order type of movement. So we talk about BRICS, but there's also like the Five Eyes crypto, right? Like this is a data generating machine. So you would think that they would be pro crypto because it's so visible. Do you have any thoughts on that?
There, for sure, the Five Eyes is an excellent example, right, Darren? Because let's not forget that the Five Eyes is actually an intelligence sharing apparatus. That's what it was born from. But you're right. The reason that they're all in agreement is because of that fantastic sharing of information. I would say that governments, for sure, are pro blockchain because you have a lock solid audit trail that at least according to current technology is extremely secure. Cryptocurrency is something everybody wants to see in the future as well, because it would eradicate the use of dollar bills. It would be efficient in many, many different ways. But decentralized cryptocurrency is something that is completely counter to what federal governments want anywhere in the world, because so much of the income that a country generates, so much of the GDP, the productivity itself, is tied to being able to manage and benefit or profit off of controlling the movement of finances, not to mention national security, law enforcement, et cetera, et cetera. When you decentralize that, when you take that away from the government's ability to see the transaction or track users on either side, then that becomes more of a threat to the existence of the state and the democracy itself. Again, democracy through the lens of the state, because again, the individual is much less important than the preservation of the state through the lens of national security. But that's why you see a continual evolution towards using some sort of digital currency, but that doesn't mean it's going to be decentralized.
Okay. Yeah, so seigniorage, right? Like the government relies on the seigniorage that comes from a currency. And I mean, David has some experience with this. He's actually helping the Swiss National Bank try to figure out a way to use the benefits of privacy preserving technology to kind of reflect cash. Can you talk a little bit about Project Tourbillon and what you plan on doing with Project Tourbillon, David?
Well, thanks, Darren. I think that the whole idea of CBDC, it's widely supported by central banks around the world and by countries. It's somehow thought to be somewhat inevitable. But what the public feels is that if such a state-run currency would allow the state to see every payment that they make, to evade the privacy of their payments, so that would be a reversal of the privacy people already have with cash. That people feel that would be beyond the pale, unacceptable. That would be a crossing of the line. Now you might say, well, that's an odd thing because it's not such a big deal, or why that only? But I think the reason is, weirdly, a lot of what people do is based on what the stories they learned when they were growing up. And if you look at the science fiction literature, the idea that government would be able to trace your payments and find you through your payments and so on is a thread that's often repeated in the literature. People associate that kind of surveillance with a very totalitarian regime, and so it's simply, I think, for that reason that that nation states that would offer such a payment system while reserving some kind of special surveillance capability are setting themselves up for a real rejection of that technology by the public. It would seem to me. So I'll just repeat something that I've said before. I just want to make clear that the reason I developed that technology, which is, by the way, it's the Bank for International Settlements, which is the central bank that's really behind this joint venture to develop this and prove it out, was to show that security, like quantum resistance, in particular, could not be used as an argument to necessitate a CBDC with surveillance. So what I showed, you can have quantum resistance and privacy, and even in a better kind of privacy than you have today, simultaneously. So there's no security excuse for a country to issue a CBDC that spies on people or could spy on them. So if they were to do it, it would only be because they want to have that surveillance capability. So this technology proves that, and so I thought that was worth doing. But the only way for it to prove that is for this technology to really, prove that it's practical and acceptable. And so that's what's being done now. And I think this is very fundamental, and it can, propagate a meme that people can protect their own information, and that governments have to be sensitive to people's concerns over their protected sphere in a democracy. And so this is all, it's an extremely positive thing. So I'm quite happy with it and proud of it.
I agree with you. You need to have the precedent for it to be a norm, right? Right. Like people need to see that it can actually happen, that there's benefits to it, the whole 9 yards. I mean, speaking about that, like I said with history, right? We're at a point right now where people are questioning elections, where Ray Dalio has predicted that we're going to have some type of civil war between the states. You're going to see states branch off because neither party is going to accept defeat in the next election. And that doesn't even seem plausible. It seems probable to me at this point. The more I'm on social media, the more things that I'm seeing, and it's really, I have friends in New York that are leftists, and friends in Texas that are right wing people, and like they're so extreme now. They've just been brought to these extreme levels where they just don't even accept that the other party should even exist. So David's working on something called VoteXX, and they're trying to make truly trustless voting. You would think with something to this critical type of this is how nations can die is through something like this. You would think that would be a priority with the government. Andrew, have you heard anything from your experience about like trying to make voting trustless?
Yeah, so I'm realizing that there's just kind of there might be a fundamental discrepancy or difference between how the government approaches things and how at least a part of the crypto community looks at things. So the idea of the government works through a lens of something called trust but verify, which means really you never trust anything fully. You always have to be able to come back and verify it. So trust, but be able to verify. So the idea of having any kind of technology, whether it's voting technology or currency or something else, if there's no way that you can go back and verify that the results are in fact trustworthy, then no government of a first world country is going to participate in that kind of activity, because it goes against the fundamental opinion or the fundamental capability that they have to police or enforce the laws of the land. So that's where the verify piece comes from. So if you were to have a trustless system where essentially like it's all handled through encrypted communication and nobody can go back and actually confirm the results or go back and confirm what data was collected or how it was collected in a seamless way, then that would be something that the governments would kind of push against inherently. Otherwise, it always leaves. David, hold on, David. David, hold on. Hold on. You love to tell me how wrong I am, and you love to say how right you are, but I feel like that is a traditional American point of view. So I kind of feel like when you talk, you are talking like a traditional idealistic American, which is fine, but that's not the kind of conversation I'm trying to have. And that's not the kind of conversation I want to give the folks paying attention, right? If you want to understand how the government thinks through a lens of, I would love to trust, but I can never trust, so I have to be able to verify independently of whatever you tell me.
Yes, okay, and I think you're right. It's a good point, but it's really a part of the problem. I just wanted to point out that in the modern world with cryptography, like that theorem that I mentioned, that I got this big deal award from the ACM about, we've proven mathematically that it's just simply not true, that you can be more sure that the election was correct just by using the crypto than you could ever be by some kind of audit. And so, I'm going to make a general comment here because it's a pretty wide audience, and I just want to share my insights. And I'm sorry, and I'm not criticizing you. I realize you're giving the perspective government. It's very interesting. But yeah, all right.
Well, to that point,
I'll come back to the point I'd like to make. Let me not interrupt the flow here.
Well, he was just talking about the trustless and verifiable nature. But to your point, that we hear central planners such as like Klaus Schwab talk about a major cyber attack that's going to happen. And there's more attack vectors than just like quantum computing, right? A lot of these encryption technologies can break. And you brought up Swift earlier. I believe Swift was hacked with like a fax machine like 10 years ago or something. North Korea hacked billions of dollars from Swift. Now, what I'm getting to is the central planners keep putting it out there that there's a cyber attack. Now, I don't know if that's because of just because they're studying it and worrying about the possibility, or if they're actually like kind of forecasting something. You can never really tell if that's if somebody's forecasting something or somebody is actually saying it. So my question really is do you think that central planners have that type of control? What are the implications of a cyber attack?
Yeah, I think that you're asking the right kind of question here, Darren, right? The fact is there will always be bad guys. Always. There's always going to be people who try to innovate and create a better way, right? I think David is one of those better way types of people. Then there will always be people who want to follow the most efficient path, right? So there will always be followers who follow the lead, but then there will always also be villains, people who want to take advantage of the followers and people who are going to try to find a loophole or a weakness in what the leaders are creating. You have to understand that that's just human nature. That's just how it works, right? That's human beings as a populace. So because of that, leaders have to always be recognizing that the very innovative things that they're working on are also going to be the priority targets for villains to try to understand and manipulate and take advantage of before they have wide-scale adoption by the main population. So when you talk about things like cryptocurrency, when you talk about things like trustless voting, when you talk about any kind of cutting-edge cryptography, it will always be a target for villainous nation states and for independent criminals and cyber criminals, because if they can figure out how to use that, or they can figure out how to hack that or get into the back door of that before it has widespread utility or widespread use, then they're going to have an actual fungible asset that they can steal from or that they can profiteer off of. As long as there have been pirates never targeted small boats. Pirates targeted big, rich boats. And that's just kind of the way it works. So that you've always got to recognize that no matter what cutting edge technology you're working on, there's going to be the most cutting edge criminals trying to take advantage of that for their own gain.
Okay, Andrew, I'd like to say you always have to recognize one other thing, which is, and there's so many examples of it. People like maybe like yourself or your former self or some people that you knew, they're so enthusiastic about protecting the country from these evils that they can't tell anyone about, and they're not, and so on. None of this is verifiable by the public, of course. So you're busy fighting all these wars, but can't tell anyone about it, but need a very sizable portion of GDP, to do it. Another aspect of all that effort is that it has historically, at least, promulgated, developed, created a very bad phenomena. So, for instance, as I mentioned earlier, the whole business of propaganda and misdirection and manipulation of the public, this was made into a science by the OSS during the Second World War, I believe. Right? This is a product of the intelligence community. Now it is spread and is, as Darren has said, has created a lack of confidence in pretty much anything because there's so much misinformation and manipulation of the public. You have, but that same phenomena is all over the place. You have the governments are creating a lot of fear of cryptocurrencies, and cryptography. That's very detrimental to development of society. Look at there's just funny examples like LSD and psychedelics and so on. The truth is they were actually promulgated by the intelligence community. Look at Afghanistan. No one disputes that over the last 20 years and the hundreds of billions of dollars or trillions that we spent there, during that whole time, they supplied 95% of global heroin. This is not disputed. But now they're supplying none, and before that they basically supplied none. So it was only during the occupation that they did. So you have to look at, there were other related, apparently related, Oliver North and all that, right? I mean, there's a lot of different, things. Look at torture. There's like torture was apparently the CIA got into it, and they're like training people all over the place how to do it and all this. And, there's just bunches of examples of all this, money and good intention and these dedicated people, where what do they call it? The methods, not the sources, but the methods of the intelligence community have actually gone out and just backfired and just harmed society. So there's a huge, blowback's a funny term, but there's a huge negative consequence for democracy when we put so much resource into espionage and surveillance and all this secret.
David, how did you feel on September 11th, 2001? That was the biggest intelligence failure in your lifetime. How did you feel that day?
I don't know if that was the biggest intelligence failure.
In your lifetime, that was the biggest intelligence failure.
The guy walked out of what's supposed to be the most secure information security.
David, no Americans died. No Americans. Nobody died. Nobody died when Snowden did his thing.
But Andrew, if nobody died, then the NSA should just shutter itself, because if all those secrets aren't really worth anything, why are we spending trillions of dollars to have them? I'm lost on that.
We weren't spending trillions of dollars when 2,000 Americans died on September 11th. The trillions of dollars that you're talking about all came about post 9/11.
50%, or we've only, it's not that dramatically.
Take a look at the 9/11 commission, man. We more than tripled the intelligence budgets following 9/11 because we were focused on the wrong things. To your point, pre 9/11, we were very focused on just looking at combating communism and the spread of communism against Russia. All of the stuff that you've listed, even your idea of misdirection only being 20 years old, misdirection and misinformation and propaganda, that dates back to Sun Tzu, that dates back to ancient Egypt. Those are practices that are in the Bible, right? Like espionage has been around as long as human beings have been around. It's not a propaganda that's been developed by the OSS. That was exactly what you said, David, that the OSS developed propaganda.
I think they really did make it into a fine art, and it's those very practices and those trained people which are basically still doing all this stuff.
David, what you think is not what is actual fact. It's just what you think.
All right.
Well, Andrew, to that point though, like there is so if you look at like everything that's going on, there does seem to be people that are in U.S. intelligence agencies that kind of are doing like the opposite of what we think they're doing, right? Like it almost seems like it's an internal attack. Is there like any evidence or I don't know if any examples that you could bring up that feels like an internal attack to you? You brought up, one of you guys brought up like the opioid crisis, but there's somebody looking the other way to have, the mass amounts of fentanyl crossing the borders. There's somebody that knows that's just not willing to step up. Somebody's always looking the other way. But that comes from within. That's not all externally, and there are external threats too, right? Like you go on social media, you see CCP bots, you see Russian bots trying to spread seeds of discontent in everyone's ears. It's interesting to me that stuff's happening, yet nobody is really paying attention to it.
So Darren, your point is totally valid. except you're taking it, the default. You've probably heard me talk about Hanlon's razor, right? Never subscribe to conspiracy never subscribe to conspiracy that which can be explained through idiocy. We all lean on conspiracy explanations. Instead, just lean on the fact that it's the federal government. When was the last time you went to the DMV and they did something efficient? I mean, come on, guys. It's CIA, FBI, DIA. It's no different. Do you want to know why nobody cares about the war on drugs? Because the war on drugs is not going to threaten American democracy. The success and survival of the state is not tied to fentanyl, right? That's why nobody cares. There's human trafficking all over the world. The reason nobody funds it because it doesn't threaten national security. National security dollars, the black budget that's, too classified for me to even actually be able to talk about, those dollars are reserved for the most significant threats to the longevity of the American government. That's why they're there, because without the United States government, there is no United States. This is a fundamental understanding that people need to have. The government does not care about individual Americans. The government cares about the preservation of the government. Without the government of the United States, there is no United States. There's just a group of people that will reorganize themselves in whatever way. So it's not that somebody's turning a blind eye. It's not that somebody's on the inside coordinating the mass growth of drug use and drug spread or anything else. It's just that it's not being funded. I had friends who worked in the Department of State overseeing the anti-heroin and opioid issues in Afghanistan, and their constant complaint was they couldn't get enough funding to be able to actually handle the operations. And because the federal government at the time under Barack Obama dictated that we had to use a certain amount of indigenous workers local to Afghanistan to actually execute those operations. Well, guess what happens? When you find an Afghan and you try to pay them to rat out the heroin farms in Afghanistan, they don't cooperate because they're going to get killed by the Taliban. So what little funding there was being dictated by bureaucratic rules that limited the success of those operations, right? You can't call that a conspiracy. That's just bureaucratic lunacy.
We know, Andrew, that you have a pretty much a hard stop at 1:30. Darren, go ahead if you want to follow up, and then maybe closing thoughts. And I'm
well, that was one of the questions that I got from the crypto community. They're extremely skeptical, right? And is it like strings being pulled versus everything? A lot of people were wondering if you're kind of like some soap opera star that purposely put in front of us to tell us what we're supposed to be thinking, how the CIA is supposed to think, and it's kind of like a psyop. Do you have a response for that? And like, is there any element of string pulling, right? Like, so we talked about idiots involved, right? But could there be people that pull strings too? And it's just not
for sure.
Organized?
So the term that you're looking for, Darren, is a term actually coined by the Soviets called useful idiot. A useful idiot, as under the idea of the KGB, was somebody who would spread a narrative that was in the best interest of Soviet era Russia, right? So here's what we know for sure about me, Darren. I am former CIA. I am no longer under the employ of CIA. They don't pay me. They don't. I mean, plenty of people at CIA don't even like me. They still tell me that through my own channels, right? But here's the thing. I try to tell the truth as I have seen it and in my experience. And when my truth is in line with the federal government, guess what they do? They let me keep talking. There have been times where I have said things that they disagreed with, and I get a phone call and I get reminded of my secrecy agreement. So what that means, Darren, is that when I'm a useful idiot that benefits CIA, they let me talk. When I cross a boundary that they don't agree with, I get a phone call, right? I understand my piece in all of this. There's no conspiracy here. The truth is that the crypto community and many sub niche communities out there, they're very nervous because they're still in an exploratory, they're on the Wild West, to use Solomon's words, right? They're on the Wild West of something new. It's all It's all pioneer kind of engineering. And that's a dangerous, scary place to be. So everywhere you look, you have to classify people as either friends or enemies. So it's easy to classify me as an enemy because I don't necessarily agree with a lot of the mainstream topics out there in the crypto community. If you want to judge me as an enemy, that's totally fine with me. I really don't care what you think. The truth is, I can tell you how the federal government is most likely going to react to new technologies. And when it comes to cryptocurrency and when it comes to centralized banking of digital currencies, the government is going to most likely resist and move slowly. That doesn't mean that it's a bad investment or a bad use of your time, but for sure, they're going to move slowly because the government doesn't move quickly and efficiently with anything. Nope, you're on mute still, Darren. Unless
I'm sorry. That's what we have seen too, is that the government is moving awfully slow, and you know, you see key people in positions in crypto, and at the same time, the government's moving excessively slow. So it matches up with what's happening. What, Brian? Did you have something? I cut you off earlier.
No, you're fine. I know Andrew messaged in the chat here. He has 10 minutes left, which was at 1:30 p.m. And you know, I think to follow, I think what we've seen over the past couple of years, especially, there has been a narrative and a rhetoric shift around the adoption of digital assets, distributed ledger technology. Even from the XX Twitter, there was a great a video from Thomas Moser from Swiss National Bank talking about the separation or the difference between wholesale central bank digital currencies and retail central bank digital currencies, and how there's really an acceleration from the wholesale standpoint, but the retail side from tier one nations is a little bit of a different animal as well. Knowing that you have kind of a hard stop here, Andrew, and knowing how pretty interesting discussion that we've had here today. I know that there was lots of back and forth. Always amazing to have David up here on these panels and to allow him to share his knowledge and insight. And wanted to extend out a thank you to you as well, Andrew. Exciting spaces. Darren, I don't know if you want to close us out, but thank you so much, David, and thank you to Andrew as well.
Is there anything that I didn't touch on that you think is important to share? Does anyone have anything that they want to share that I didn't talk about?
You know, I really appreciate David's point of view, and I just want to say that, like, David, I really do honestly appreciate your point of view. It was a point of view I had before I went into CIA. Honestly, I honestly thought that we were one common humanity and one common world, and we all had common goals. And honestly, man, all it took was a couple of weeks in Africa, a couple of weeks in Southeast Asia, and like 48 hours in India before I realized that humans outside of the United States are all just scrapping to survive. Nobody outside of the United States talks about making the world a better place. Nobody outside of the United States really takes a global economic or a global environmental crisis seriously. Politicians in Europe talk about that for political reasons, but your average person on the street, most places, they're just trying to survive. And if you look at the metrics behind the crypto community, 60% of crypto community buyers make more than $100,000 a year. So that means that the vast majority of people investing in crypto, individual investors in crypto, are in the top 2% of income earners in the entire world. So while the crypto community is a fairly homogeneous community of wealthy investment type people, they are not reflective of the vast majority of people. So I believe that you do speak to the heart and soul of that crypto community. But it's important for that community to understand that they are not reflective of the average person in the United States or the average person in the world. They are in the top echelon when it comes to wealth and socioeconomic status.
Thank you. Where can we find you if we want to find more information about your stuff, Andy?
If anybody actually wants to hear from me more, which I would be shocked by at this point, you can find me at my homepage, everydayspy.com, or if you follow social media, your favorite social media platform, you'll find me at Everyday Spy. And then I have my own podcast out there called the Everyday Espionage Podcast. So any of those three locations, and you'll be able to hear all you want to hear from me and disagree with me or agree with me to your heart's content.
I don't think we could possibly get any more freedom of speech into one singular podcast and interview that we had back and forth. I thought it was pretty amazing to kind of watch you guys back and forth.
I really enjoyed the difference of opinion. It's like you get stuck in echo chambers and then that's it. You don't ever think anything outside. The AI is controlling our world. So I really appreciate having conflicting opinions. And David, do you have anything that you want to share before we close this out? I know there's times that you wanted to speak and kind of talked over you, which I apologize. I'm just trying to move things.
No, it's okay. I mean, I think I've been on your show before, and it was great to get to hear Andrew out, and I appreciate his candidness and the perspective that he shared. I mean, it's not completely unfamiliar to me. I mean, it does make sense, but I think it should be balanced by several other considerations. Don't forget, like the CIA, is known to have manipulated the election in Italy right after the Second World War. I met a guy who told me he worked for the NSA election manipulation department once, and he seemed to know an awful lot about how to manipulate elections. So it's a double-edged sword. All this intelligence stuff. It has your methods are leaking out. You're changing the way people perceive reality and the possibilities and so forth. It's not free. We pay a really heavy price for it, and I just think that somehow there's a bit of a major sea change inflection point that we're coming up to, where hopefully the world can try to use a lot of the great stuff that we've developed for good purposes, and sort of deprecate and all this acrimony and combative stuff that's probably the biggest problem of our times. And most people think that our times are really a very, very serious existential crisis. The public does not think that we're in a nice, stable, happy world. They see things kind of coming at us. The various apocalypses, is that the plural? Are underway at once, and I think, as was said by several people here, that we are at a point where maybe some fundamental changes could really occur. And this has historically been the kind of situation that's led to that. And so all this perspective on these, how a state wants to protect itself, and how the warriors for this kind of thing look at the world, and some of these bigger issues. It's all very, very useful to kind of shake people up a bit and get them to think. I think the ultimate question is, like, what are we fighting for? What we do have the power. What kind of world do we want to make? That's really the question. Everything's is so much up for grabs these days. There's so much, instability and conflict and inflection and radical technology change and all kinds of other things. Everything's so unstable with all this acrimony that really the thing to do is think about where would we like to go? Where should we go? How can we get there? Let's do that.
Yep.
Right. All right. It's important to think like that. It's we are coming to an inflection point, and the freedom of information, the freedom of technology just really accelerates things too. Opinions spread like wildfire. But I hope everyone enjoyed the show. Please remember to subscribe. Please remember to like, comment, tell us what you think, what we could have changed. Let us know what you think. Thanks everybody for joining.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks.
Thank you, everyone.